Okay, as I was saying before, I see a few of you got in, that I was able to make establish contact with Dr. Chukwunyere Kamalu. Who is Dr. Chukwunyere Kamalu? Person, Divinity, and Nature, among several others. So he's the author of our main text. And I got in touch with him because I was asked about possibilities of who could be the external examiner for this course. They gave me a list of names of people who were Reverend this and Pastor that. And I said, really? And I said, at best, we would possibly get someone who is somewhat sympathetic to African thought and worldview, but it would be very difficult for them to mesh being African with being anti-African at the same time. Perhaps they will work some complementary thing out, but I wouldn't. Yeah, I doubt it. So anyway, I went on a mad mission to say I need to contact Chukwunyere Kamalu, and I was successful. I found an email for him, and then he responded to the email, and we established contact. So it's looking like he will be the external examiner for this course, which is great. In our conversation, we talked for maybe about an hour, and talking to him is like reading the book. He is just a walking treasure trove of information, and he's one of the people who really understands the African worldview, African cosmology, from really just a deep core level. So that's one of the announcements. Was everyone able to attend the Armah event just now? Thoughts, reflections, and especially thoughts and reflections of how it relates to African worldview, some of the same things we're talking about here.
What he mentioned something about when he writes, he's trying to channel the voices of the ancestors and also those to come. And he kind of repeated that with his thoughts on mentorship. And it made me think of what you've been telling us about the circular nature of life. And so, yeah, that's what one thing I said.
Wonderful.
Get sweet in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Did anyone tweet or did anyone ask? I think I had a question from you. Were you the y'all?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts, reflections?
Yeah, tweeted from an account.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts, reflections on what you just heard and how it relates to foundations of African thought, what we've been learning here?
When it comes to as a Fred, just briefly, I think he said something I was really interested in, as in healing is at the center of life, and I feel like this echoes the voice of self-healing Fukia, who also, as in, says that we are all born with a healing potential, self-healing potential. So I guess this as it reflects that, emphasizes that point. And I think in the thought paper I was writing how the community is a combination of different cells, and I like how you talked about that it's also, as in the community is not just about those living, but those the ancestors, and then we should also think about our unborn kids. So I guess it's as in we have to see the community too as a collection of cells, and not just those living in it, and whatever so whatever actions we take will have consequences, not just on us but also those yet to come, those who are born.
All right, and that relates to the article that I sent. Who was able to read that article about rising sea levels? 1, 2. Okay, I sent an article that was posted to our BBC Mikasa. You can go back and check your email if you didn't see it. But it was saying that the sea level will, this past week, the sea level is expected to rise and continue to rise for twice as long as recorded human history. And basically what you've been hearing about global warming, all of these types of things, polar ice caps melting, you can look at videos where you're seeing the ice caps, the glaciers melting and going off into the ocean. So once they melt, what will happen? Eventually the sea level will rise. And even with some of the most conservative estimates, it's again expected that this will continue for at least twice as long as human history, at least 20,000 years or so. So this relates to a few things that we discussed, and we'll come back to Armah, but I want to bring this in. This relates to a few things that we've discussed. One is the relationship and responsibility to the land and to the ancestors. So if you neglect the land, if you neglect the earth, if you neglect the ancestors, then just out of the principles of reciprocity, very scientific, that you will, or your descendants, which will again be you when you reincarnate, will reap the benefits or the, how would I put it, the punishments of that type of behavior. And this is what we're going to see with the rise of the sea levels, right? So it's expected that places like New York City, Manhattan, Rio de Janeiro, Accra, all of these places that are at sea level now will be underwater. And if you actually look, you will find basically underwater cities, pyramids underwater, places that used to be coastland but have been underwater for the last several thousand years. So it's still part of human history, but it's something that they are yet to fully research and recover. So places like off the coast of Japan, off of the coast of Africa, all these places. And this is history that's going to be repeated in large part because of human actions, right? Now, that's one point. The second point was when we discussed the great year and the great months. Who remembers what that discussion was about? Right. Right.
It's moving to another. So those, yes. So those who align themselves with the fish now, the leaders in the next.
No, the fish are on their way out. What will come in is the age of the water bringer, which, surprise, surprise, we're coming into twice as long as human history. We will have what? The waters being brought. So in ancient Kemet, that was associated with Hapi, which was the Nile River and the flooding of that river, right? So this is very significant when we're looking at this age that we're coming out of in terms of the age of the fish into you. Okay. Can I get someone to assist and plug this in? That we're looking at the age of the fish, and this has been marked by those who have aligned themselves with the fish. So Christianity, all the fish symbolism. I came across one scholar who was talking about how many times fishermen are mentioned in Eurasian religion. So that's one. When you look before that, it was the age of what? The ram, which was symbolized by Amen. During that entire age, the foremost power on the face of the planet was focused in Waset. That was, again, the main center of Amen, who was represented by the ram. That was the core of world power, just like how people look at the U.S., for example, as a superpower. That's how Waset was during the entire age of the ram, right? Before that, you had Unu and Hukapata, or Min Nefer, Memphis, Heliopolis, these places. Okay, that's it. And those places were associated with Usir and Ptah and the Apis bull, which was, again, so now you're talking about the age of the bull, and during this entire age, you had those as the center of power in Kemet, which is, again, the center of world civilization at that point in time. Before that, you had the age of the twins, so-called what we understand as Gemini today. And during that period, we're talking about before the two lands were united. So before that, you had the north, which was Lower Kemet. You had the south, which was Upper Kemet. So those were the main two powers. And again, all of the iconography, the writings, they talk about the two lands. So even after unification, they would still refer to it as the two lands have now been united through Samad Tawi, right? So these are some of the things that we're thinking about. So now it gives us a different perspective about this water rising, right? On the one hand, we can see that human activity is contributing to this rising, but you can go back to at least 10, 15,000 years ago that this was predicted that at this point in time, it's going to be about water rising, the water bringer. And we're coming into a place where in the precession of the equinoxes, we're coming into the equinoctial plane where the sun will be rising with so-called Aquarius in the background. Hapi, the water bringer, or Menat, the nurse, also the water bringer. Right? So we're talking about when we're thinking on a cosmological scale to the tune of about 26,000 years plus, you can tell what's going to go on the planet. So Europeans don't know, oh wow, it's amazing, look, the water is rising, look at what we're doing. But I could have stood there 15,000 years ago in Kemet and tell you, right then, guess what, they're going to be dealing with water rising. Now it's just a matter of you all going through the actions. So this has implications as well for destiny, understanding of destiny, right? The path, this is a guiding line. So you can go off of it, you can do whatever, but at a certain point, there's a destiny for us as individuals, but then we can also look at it on a much larger scale, right? Yeah.
So then, whether climate change or no climate change, we're still going to go into the age of water. And as the cities will be conquered by water.
This is the thing in terms of how it's going to manifest, that when you know that it's going to be the age of Hapi, the flooding, the inundation, then it's just a question of how is that going to play out on the ground. So what happened 26,000 plus years ago during the last one? You see what I'm saying? Or, 52,000 years ago at the last one, that it must have been something going on in terms of inundation, flooding, but we can see how it's actually playing out on the ground here now. So the sun's energy is the source of all this energy. It's being locked into trees, locked into plants. Those plants are rotting. They're being covered by oceans. Eventually, we're trying to go back and get it in the form of crude oil. Crude oil is basically talking about plant matter, organic matter that has rotted millions and millions of years ago. And basically all that sun's energy, which was captured in the carbon, this is when we're talking about the carbon era, right? The carbon locks in the sun's energy, just like what makes us black in terms of melanin. So now you're going to try to get that sun's energy and unlock it in the form of what you're putting into your car, what you're doing, and all these things. Now that's having implications, and the implications is coinciding perfectly with what we're already expecting. Hapi, inundation, the Nile inundation, the floods, right? So it's like we could look at it, it's just coincidence, but if you understand things on this much grander scale, it's like this is right on time. This is what's expected. Now we can see that what's expected and what's right on time, that it's still to a large degree, as Armah was talking about, as a result of the disease, of the fragmentation of all these different things. So it didn't necessarily have to play out in this particular form. But again, human beings are not separate from the rest of the cosmos, right? So we've played a role in it, and now we've come to a point where this is how that inundation, this is how it's going to look like. Is everyone clear on these connections between what we're talking about? So human responsibility, neglect of the earth, neglect of the land, neglect of the ancestors, all basically coterminous. At this point in time where many of us as continental Africans have thrown our ancestors in a garbage can or in the fire, literally, you read about in Nigeria, things that were passed down as heirlooms for thousands of years beyond what anyone can remember. Some pastor is coming and say, burn all of that. Now, it's a package deal, because as you're neglecting your ancestors, you're also at the exact same time, guess what? Neglecting the earth. you're neglecting the land. And guess what? When you reincarnate, you will have to pay the price for what you did right now. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to pay attention to the ancestors but forget the land. I don't care about the land for when they come back. And then it's also not, oh, I care about the earth and the land but forget about the ancestors when they come back. It's a package deal.
Well, another thought that
Yeah.
comes to mind is, as in talking about us neglecting the once again, BT talks about how, as in, well, from in his view, Africans, as in, don't, the farthest they can see into the future is 2 years. And doesn't it like validate what he says, as in, us neglecting the earth right now, as in, I feel like it kind of validates what he says because we are not looking beyond maybe, let's say, 5 years, 10 years, or when I die, but it's all about, well, why not just eat today and then, well, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, so let me live for the future. Does it, in your opinion, you think
I think that the idea that Africans can't see into the future any more than 2 years would be the reason why we need African studies. Because if you read the original text, you would read where we were saying we're building for eternity. That's this concept, hey. So it's one thing to just say, oh, Africans say this, Africans say that, or can't do that. It's another thing to actually, like where Armah was talking about, engage the actual source text. So now I don't have to deal with what in BT or whatever. I can just go to what we're talking about here. So this is He. This is eternity. So when Africans were building pyramids, when we were building temples, when we were doing all these things, we're saying that we're not building for 2 years. Obviously, because they're still standing after 2 years. And this was the intention. They say we're building for eternity. So even the Arab invaders who are there now have a proverb where they say, man fears time, but time fears the pyramids. Because the time was like, all right, I'm not dealing anything with you. I can't mess with you. Right? So again, engaging the primary text. It's good to read in BT, it's good even to read Kamalu, it's good to read Fukiao, whoever, but the wealth, the treasure trove of information goes from going to those actual sources from 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. What were they saying now? Because other than that, you're dealing with someone recent's interpretation of it. But you are just as African as Mbiti, so why not go to those exact same source texts and find out what did they actually say? Right? So that's eternity in the time, in temporal eternity. But then they had a concept of jet. So Jet is talking about spatial eternity, right? So some of this is covered in Theophile Obinga's book, African Philosophy of the Pharaonic Period, where he introduces some key concepts, Jet, He, when to exist, right? All these are very deep philosophical concepts. And we can go back to those primary texts and say, well, what did our African ancestors have to say about this? And then we don't have to take Mbiti's word for it. We can go and see, what did you all say?
How do you spell jet? Is it
Jet, like this.
J-T?
This is how it would be written. So this is a J, and then this is a T, like that. When people try to anglicize it or work with it for pronunciation, they do it like this.
J-O-T.
Yeah, like that J sound. This is He, and then anglicized. And this was mentioned. There's also a deity that was called He, which was associated with eternity as well. I think we covered how to write that in the last class as one of the original 8 from the Hermopolitan. creation story. So you have He and Hehet. So also a deity, so a concept in terms of eternity, but also a deity. As in the Himenu or Hermopolis version from about 2686 BCE to about 2520 BCE, they had that concept as well. Now, so again, when people try to date the pyramids, one of the things that they use, and I covered this in a different lecture that I gave entitled Humanities and Science. Actually, if you look it up online, 13,000 years and 13 minutes. But in it, basically we dealt with how when people try to date the pyramids, they date it based on specific alignments where these inner chambers point to specific stars. And the last time that they pointed to those stars was around 2570 years ago. So this is something that happens every so often where they say, you know what, in the next cycle it's going to come back and align with those specific stars. So this is prediction on a grand scale where, every few thousand years we're predicting that this is going to happen. Also in Kemet they predicted eclipses ahead of time, solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, beyond just 2 years. So again, go to the primary text, go to the source text, and those would tell you everything that you need to know. Again, Armah, in relation to what we are learning, Ayekwe Armah. Feel free.
Yes, the question of language. We are talking about this. I feel like it's a really great challenge, and one that we must really think through. I don't know.
As what you're saying, they're actually raging. There's a total debate about it that it's not possible. There's nothing like African commonality. Stuff is going on right now. Information.
Is it based on this?
On
okay.
Because I tweeted, I quoted some of the stuff. So that's what they're talking about, what you just said, the language and African commonality. Someone saying it's not possible. It sounds like a madman talk.
Wonderful.
I mean, that's not true. Yes.
I think the reason why people think like that is that it's very easy to forget that language is socially created, and that I didn't listen to the history of the English language. The Chaucer that was written back then, they give it to an English person, the person may not be able to read it now. So people forget that language evolves over time, and if you put your mind to it and you start teaching all African children Hausa at a particular point in the time, they'll grow up speaking it. So if we adapt one language and get people to start teaching it can happen. People just want to use the argument of it's impossibility just because they want to shut their minds to it. That's what I think.
I think, and also it's I feel like it's a question of pride. I mean, what's language and who's
Yeah, you kind of answered that too. You kind of answered that. Like you won't use any language there already, but then kind of like the roots of all the language, such that any person, if I speak Akan, I'll be able to recognize at least something in that language. If I speak Swahili, that was complex. That was
but if he talked about pre-Berlin conference and the Africa pre-Berlin conference, and if you have to think about that Africa without those boundaries, I'm sure the people who lived in those spaces managed to negotiate their way with their nearest neighbors. They didn't have, you can't leave, and the days before airplanes and transport, you can't leave here and go to South Africa and expect someone to understand your language, but you should be able to leave here and get to Benin or Nigeria and still communicate. And I'm sure there were ways, they had ways in which they communicated. So I think the language issue can be surmounted if we put our minds to it. And like you said, if we all grow up learning a language, learning. I mean, there are people in Accra who haven't been beyond. Adenta is too far. Tetekwashi. Yeah, they haven't been beyond Tetekwashi, but they still speak Tree. How do they learn to speak Tree?
Actually, in Mali, I met people who spoke.
Same thing. I went to Burkina Faso, I went to Mali.
Yeah.
Everywhere I went, I got to the Ghanaian community, they were speaking Chi.
Yeah. They're still speaking Yoruba in Salvador, in Brazil, after all these years. So
And they're speaking Yoruba in Ghana.
Yeah.
So,
It's possible. It doesn't have to be one language. There's so many languages that we can use. Luckily, if you go to Europe, the French speak English. The English don't speak French. They don't speak German. The Germans speak English, and sometimes they speak French too. The English don't speak German. Everybody speaks English, but the English really don't tend to speak anybody's language. So it's the same type of imperialistic way of thinking. So they are not really that organized either, because they all don't speak the same language.
right.
So we shouldn't be beating ourselves on the head all the time because we don't have a common language, because they don't have a common language.
You want to come?
And I think one of the reasons why people keep saying that it's impossible to speak an African language is because we've speaking English has become synonymous with being intelligence. So we feel like if we adopt any other language, our intelligence has been compromised. We are afraid to even think of the possibility of being smart without an English language or any other language. So we don't want to even think about it. So the moment you bring it up, it's impossible. But if we are willing to look at it, look at the possibilities and make it work, I think it would be a beautiful thing to do.
I'll say this. I started posting videos to assist. In the U.S. in particular, people are already speaking African. What do I mean by that? That you will go to one person who has any level of African-centered consciousness, he'll greet you by saying Hotep, right? That's coming from ancient Kemet. And then they'll start talking about Oshun and Yemoja, that's coming from Yoruba. And then they'll go to a school called Uhuru Sasa, which is Kiswahili, that for them, and again, this is one of the main things in terms of modern quote-unquote Pan-Africanism starting in the diaspora, is that there tends to be already a view of Africa as Africa. So, you could say, it's ignorance. We have all these different people, and, we have peoples, and languages and groups and countries. But for people there, Africa is Africa. So basically, now there's a proverb in Yoruba, Agbam beninu ago, agosim beninu agbam. It translates to that there is a little bit of foolishness inside of wisdom, and there's a little bit of wisdom inside of foolishness. That because people view Africa in that way, they will take a word from here, a word from there, and very organically, they're already starting this process that we're saying can't be done. So what I started doing is a series called Do You Speak African? You can check out the videos on a Bibi Tumikasa, where everyone, when they pour a libation at an event, and I'll again talking about the U.S. situation, everyone will be saying Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Now, one of the things people will say, Ashe, which isn't quite the pronunciation. So the point of the video series is to assist. I know that this process is going on organically, but now let me add a little bit into it that the pronunciation Ashe, it comes from the root verb she, to happen. So Ashe is that which causes something to happen. So if you say something that I want to happen, I say Ashe in order to give the power. And this relates back to the text, that words have power. We went to common elements in the African worldview, that the word and the power of the word, you find that expressed very clearly in examples like that. So that was the first one, because people come to my Yoruba class. I teach Yoruba online through Bibi Tumikasa. Everyone comes and like, yeah, Ashe. I'm like, okay, And I said, as opposed to waiting for every single class session to start and people saying Ashe, let me just do a preemptive strike and give them that one right off the bat. Another word I mentioned, Uhuru, because there people say Yahoo, because they're not used to starting a word with a oo sound. So they'll make it a Y sound because they know, yes, there are words that exist that start with Y. So they'll try to make it like that. Well, I'm saying, all right, let's add into it. You're speaking African, yes, wonderful, but now let's just give a little bit of input to that. So I think that that's one way, and it's not being controlled by any, council or government, but people are doing it right now. That if I go to anyone, they know all the words in Kiswahili for Kwanzaa. They know the words in Yoruba related to spirituality. They know how to say Medasi. They know how to say Nomo. They know the concept of Nomo and Yurugu that we're discussing here. And it's just kind of a piecemeal pull together. But as that grows, eventually what we're saying can't be done is being done in front of our eyes. Right? Now, on the other side, I'm also part of a collective. And I mentioned this with Aikwe Armah, and what he said was, all right, he's down with the group. That it's a group working to revitalize Medu Necha, or the oral form that he mentioned was Ro in Kemet, which is literally Ro is the mouth, and that's what you see here is the mouth symbol. Is of, it's an all-purpose preposition. It can be used as to, of, from, and then Kemet, which is, as you all know, the land of Kemet. So the written one, Medu Necha, that's the resources that we're pulling from is the Medu Necha. But now we're trying to get back to Ro in Kemet, the mouth of Kemet, or, you could say colloquially the tongue, the language, the spoken language, the spoken word of Kemet. Ro, Kemet. Right? And the pronunciation Ro is tied to Coptic, which is a later stage of the language where they still have Ro. Now, in Theophilo Obengo's book, he goes throughout the entire continent and shows how in different places that word still exists. So the word Ano in Akan, for example, is one of the ones that he lists as tied back to the Ro sound that you find in Kemet. So different languages have Ro, No, Lo, something like that, usually a lateral or a rhotic or nasal sound that's still in line with this same Ro. And Serhanta Job had the vision, and I'll come back to the group that I was mentioning, that Medu Necha or Ro in Kemet, once we can actually enunciate it, can be that unifying language. Because, for example, someone coming from the diaspora will come to Ghana and be like, oh, if I learn Chi, I'm good. Now meet a Ghana speaker, World War III. You're thinking this is the most viable, you're completely not malicious. You're thinking this is the most viable. You've seen the percentages. You say, oh, okay, let me learn Chi. But then people will tell you that's not my language, right? Or do that with Ewe. Let's say, all right, Chi should be the national language. The Ewe person will chop your head off just about, right?
That's if you say Chi is my national language.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you suggest that Tree should be the national language, again, you're coming from it like, oh, I just think this would be good. But there are so many emotions that are tied to these people enslaved my great-grandmother, and I don't forget that. Even though the great-grandmother who was enslaved is the one who's coming back and saying, let's make Tree the national language because we got a bigger enemy than these Tree people. I'm the one who got enslaved. Let me give some input on this thing. They're like, no, them people, they came and they did. So this is a problem, not just in Ghana, right? This is a problem where people will say that's not my language. And this is one of the challenges. We had this ongoing debate on a Bibi Tumikasa as well about who is an African and what is an African. You could have that discussion forever. But just in terms of here, when we come to public fora and the African Union and whatever, we talk about a we as though we think about ourselves like that on a daily basis. We're like rhetorical Africans. When we meet, then we start talking about where we are African. But on our day-to-day basis, I don't wear that because that's what Akans wear. I don't wear that. That's Northerners, thing. The dress is even starting to come down. People are wearing smock more, right? That's becoming whatever. Food. Oh, that's the food of those people. And I don't even have to say what they are. You all know which ones are which, right? So that's not my food. That's their food. And if you're eating it, you're eating those people's food. It's not a thing even of we're all Ghanaians. So that's Ghanaian food. I'm a Ghanaian. That's my food. That's a Ghanaian language. I'm a Ghanaian. That's my language too. So even to get to that point, before we can say I'm an African, therefore Shona is my language. You see what I'm saying? So looking at the reality of on the ground of all of this quote unquote tribalism, to use that pejorative term, Sheikh Anta Diop was looking at Medu Neter as a language that people aren't going to say, oh, that's their language, that's not my language. This is a collective language, and you can find these elements in all of these living African languages to this day, right? You can find Chi, you can find Ga, you can find Ewe, you can find Dagbamba, you can find all of these languages inside of Medu Neter, right? So basically this group, and it's Dr. Raketi Amin, who's been at the forefront of this movement for some time to revitalize the language. She also has a conversation book called Mejat Wafa, where she has just common everyday greetings, good morning, good afternoon, thank you, whatever, to really put some weight towards this revitalization process. So she's brought myself and several other scholars on board to look at contemporary African languages in order to get back to what the spoken language was. So oftentimes in the past, people have looked at Coptic and said, well, what Coptic is must be the closest approximation. Now, one of the challenges with that is that the people who stayed in the Nile Valley, which are the Coptic speakers, that they were subject to invasion after invasion after invasion, from Hyksos, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Mamluks, Bedouins, all these types of invasions. So it would be a bit naive to think that in the face of all of that onslaught, nothing has changed, that yes, they kept it as it is. Now, the other side are the people who moved away, that the reason why they moved away is because they were trying to avoid the influence and the onslaught of these invasions. So to a certain degree, we have to at least entertain the concept that some of those languages that moved away may have been more conservative than even those that stayed. You understand? So basically we have scholars of Meroitic, of Medu Neter, of contemporary African languages, which is what I'm representing. Other people represent other contemporary African languages, continental Africans, diasporan Africans, all coming together around the same problem of vocalization of Medu Neter. Oftentimes, even saying Medu Neter is a convention where when we don't know what the vowel is, we just insert the E sound, Medu Neter, right? And people have different theories about what that may have been. Maybe it was intro, looking at Akan and saying, oh, well, maybe it's similar to the concept of intro. Maybe it's like this, maybe it's like that. But at this point, the role of comparative and historical linguistics is to see systematically how we can look at the contemporary African languages and get back to what the sounds must have been at that point in time, taking into account Coptic, taking into account the Greek translations and their approximations, all these different types of things. So what I see already happening is that type of process, which is much more intentional, right? We're saying this is what we're trying to do for a specific objective of us having a common language that's going to be beyond, that's your language. I don't want your language. Why not my language? Why are we choosing your language? Why are we speaking your language, right? Because we're not at the point of I'm African. That's an African language, let's lift it up. Right now we're at a point of I would rather all of us be under our enemy's language than to lift up any African language. Right? That's where we are. But the one we're talking about in the U.S. is very organic, and there's nobody in control of that. People get hold of a word, that word is taken off. If it's from Mali, that word is taken off. Everyone knows the Kora. Everybody knows the djembe. Everybody knows, these concepts from Fukiao, Dikenga, all these different things. And they're just running with it. They're not asking permission. They're not waiting for the continental Africans to do it. We're African. And we're creating Africans.
What do you think of what he said about the UN decade? Or what was it? His thoughts about the UN, the agenda,
agenda for Africa,
Yeah.
Africa's agenda for itself.
I thought it was a very astute response. I think I was coming from Dr. Matlu when he came, that his lectures were basically, are we going to take advantage of it? Are we going to fritter it away? Now, this goes back, I think a couple of classes ago we were talking about how it can be problematic when you as an African are saying the same thing that your enemy is saying. So whether it's in terms of ideology, whether it's in terms of whatever, they've made a proclamation and now we're trying to see how we can hop on board that proclamation, that vehicle, to use that terminology, and seeing can we get some benefits out of this. Perhaps we can. Perhaps there's a role for people who want to do that. There's going to be money allocated, I'm sure, for conferences, for NGOs, for whatever around that. So people are going to be able to eat off of that thing. But I thought it was very astute to be like, okay, the UN is the dog being wagged by the tail. The US, Israel, Security Council, these, powerful ones, and then the unpowerful ones who go and make their speeches, and who cares? The powerful ones carry the day, right? So the degree to which we would align ourselves with that and say their agenda is our agenda, let's just hop on that, I think it would be wise for us to say, as African people, we know what the UN has done. We know what UN soldiers in Central African Republic have done, in Congo have done. We know what all these branches of the UN, we know UN countries attacking other so-called UN countries. But if it's in Africa, who cares? Removing people from government, but hey, the US wants it to happen, so we're not going to say anything about it, right? So at the very least, it would be intelligent for us as African people to say, what's our agenda? Maybe there are some people who are going to get whatever they're going to get out of it, but what are we thinking? Because whatever they create is usually for their benefit. So if they create a conference on this thing of whatever, they'll make sure that everyone who is on the conference is flying Delta. They're going to have the conference in New York City and put you up at New York hotels, like in the whole thing that's to help Africa. And you find this time and time again with all these conferences. There's a conference that's about to come up about the reconstruction of the Niger-Congo language group, and it's going to be in Paris, France. And you're going to have to, I'm sure, fly Air France to get there, stay in French hotels, eat French food and baguettes. So, they know why they're doing whatever they say, that, I'm going to get some benefit out of it. So for us, we need to be thinking about what ideas are we originating and what benefits do we intend to get out of it. There may be some unintentional benefits that we just happen to say, oh, wow, what a windfall. I'm glad they declared that because now I'm able to do my NGO. But the degree to which your thinking and your enemy's thinking should be perfectly aligned, I think that there's a problem there.
I found interesting when you talked about Ghana independence not starting an African administration.
Yeah.
And that kind of hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Not start an African administration and continue the work of the colonizer.
Yeah.
And it was very profound. Besides, the second one is maybe we should have started an administration under a tree rather than going back to the slave castle, which has a negative impact on thinking. And we've only just come out of the slave castle after 50 plus years. So whatever is going on now is not going on by default. It's supposed to be going on because we've been running our country in an old slave castle.
Yeah.
And it tells in the way we are behaving and thinking.
Yeah, sometimes I'll come to you. Sometimes I look at that like you have a white refrigerator that's cooling things down. All the parts in it are white. Now let's say you take out one white part, you put in a black part, and it's still doing the exact same thing. You're expecting now it's going to be an oven, but no, you just replaced one part of this system with a black part that's doing the exact same thing. So, just...
But how do you get the one that Africans would want to have? Do we have a form of homogeneous culture that everybody will agree? And you actually have read here that even when it comes to language adoption, there's already a problem. even the food we eat. So it is a whole gamut of confusion. So to do that, I think maybe we have to look for the best. The best for them.
Big English.
You see?
You speak big English.
Why?
So maybe around Acephalus.
I feel like to compare that, to say that.
It sounds like a phallic symbol.
You know?
As in to say that Africa was a homogeneous society, so as in this concept could not, as well, we cannot find, it would be difficult to find something that will work for all of them. I don't know, it's not being really thought through, because you look at, for example, the ancient Mali state, whereby, the ancient Mali state wasn't just a homogeneous group. They had, it was a state with little, what do you call it? Is it tributaries or little? But yet still, they are utilized, I don't know. Let's say that Mansa Musa was a statesman to actually, pull all their resources together to come together one and then actually, survive for a long time. And even if you look at Asante, when they conquered, they also, through the statesman of the chief, they will make sure that they incorporate all of these people to the extent that they will see themselves as one. So when we say that, we are not a homogeneous group, so we cannot, try and test it, or there will be no sort of government that would fit us. I feel like it's not really being thought through. But if we look at how, even the small states and their conquerings and incorporations, how they did that, that would actually be a step to some sort of answers as to how to incorporate the whole of Africa into one state.
I would like to.
I want to revert to something. When we talk about state formation and conquering or wars, is different from a modern state, which is democratic sort of thing. You can't just go and force people to come together within a democratic state as we have adopted in modern time. In that time, this was war and it was force. If I conquer you, I absorb you, you become part of me, I decide what you want to do. You cannot do away. Two, the kind of ethnicity within these social formations were not as numerous as it is in the modern political countries as we have. Ghana today and the number of ethnicities within it is what you can compare Ashanti with. All the people that are Ashantis contemporary, we are all Akan-based people, similar language. And look at Japan, all people included, they are Akan people from the same people. It is quite homogeneous. There is no any other linguistic differences in Ashanti region. They are same people. If you can do the same thing in the north, you will see that that kind of ethnicity thing, that divide is not something that was there. But when we talk of modern states, people actually have their own state formations, and they have succeeded to be called an ethnic group. So Fantis are there, the Gans are there. Within Ashanti, there was nothing like that. These were fragmented clans, as we know. The Japan people are there, Agona people are there, the Oyoko people are there. These are clans that were scattered and they brought together. So they get the differences very clear. We have a peculiar problem, and our peculiar problem that can also have an interruption of colonialism. That is what made it even worse, because certain ethnic groups were even propped up as the best than the others. You see, if you go to certain African countries, like even go to Rwanda, the Tutsis were made to look like they are the best of creatures, while the Hutus were there. So even before you leave, you have polarized the whole people, and the people don't even believe in themselves. So that when you say they should come together, now who is going to lead? Because somebody is down and somebody is up, as we explained in these diametrical opposites. Because one is good, one is bad. It is not complementary again. So the whole system, actually, we need to reorient our mind. People have proposed a lot of models. George Aite tried one, talking about trying to get the indigenous African societies And he made example of the Dahomey kingdom as well as the Asantis, and the way they run some form of democratic states, and something we can learn from. And recently we had a readings of Asuma, who is also talking about relational democracy, how to take the best of how do you call it, the Western democracy, and take the best of African democracy, and we merge it and have a whole new concept of democracy. But even that, we see that there were a lot of problems within it, because democracy itself survives on capitalism. And as long as capital is used to even run elections, there will be always recycling of the same visual elements, and that even the policies that they actually roll out, there is no collective benefit for the people below, okay, except that the elite people. So what we have is an elite alliance. If it is NPP or NDC, same bunch of elites within a certain class continue to change themselves, while the people believe are not getting it. Because when you compare it to Dahomey Kingdom, that was not happening, because they have a system called Vetame, where every year they meet and the king will share the proceeds. So there was a pooling system as well as redistribution of resources, which was quite okay there in the annual gathering. Something we are not actually doing even with our national budget, which have some political connotations that if some people from a particular area do not share even the government's idea, then you are going to the budgetary allocation is even going to be used against you. So what he said was actually right, but the design is the problem. So far, no one has given us the best design.
Okay, but I think that an issue is the legal system in which our administrative mechanisms are formulated. Because we just borrow wholesale European British system or legal system of administering their way of life. We did not engineer, or re-engineer the system. Because if you have administrative structures, what are the systems that shaping them? We just borrow British legal system. So everywhere we go, we tend to corner ourselves. However, it doesn't mean that Nkrumah didn't make certain attempts to solve it. But the dynamics of the politics of the day. So, for example, you read the works and times, the life and times of Nkrumah, and you see Ahi trying to answer that question with the chieftaincy, the kind of chieftaincy system Nkrumah wanted. It was not a constitutional one, but something that was different from the constitutional framework. But everybody thought that Nkrumah wanted to annihilate or destroy chieftaincy, just as Nyerere had done in Tanzania. And so they took him on strongly. Eventually, at the end of the day, things went berserk because he left it. But then you also look at the formation of the NLM and how they fought him teeth and nail, and then eventually Nkrumah said that. So, for example, Efrem Mahmoud's song "Yenaro Assassin" was written for our national anthem, because Nkrumah had, by 1948, Nkrumah had the idea that the Akan language should serve as our national, for our national discourses. But the political dynamics will make him change. Of course, by the early part of the 1960s, we put up another panel to reassemble that thought and bring it together. By the middle of the 60s, the plans were not in order, and structures were not put in place, and so he was moved. So first of all, let's tackle the issue from the top. What are the systems that will use in regulating our lives? If you look at the legal system, you have the Commonwealth system, which is in terms of hierarchies of law. Why should we go and borrow European systems who understand, for example, the legal jargons that are used in administrative, in governing our administrative mechanisms. The average person doesn't understand it. You get it? So we it's just like a web. We are entrapping it, and Europe is in the middle, and observing what we do. Well, everywhere we are, the strings are there, and we are being fooled. Why would our elites, buy into that argument? And today, up to today, you can't fight any of them over either opposition or force. They are all in one way or the other in a dialectic thinking for Europeans' governance and manipulation of us.
Let me come in here. This is an email from Armah. We're having a discussion. I gave a talk I'm working on a book called The Ancient African Origins of Pan-Africanism. You can check out the video on Bibi Tunikata. So I gave him the manuscript, The Ancient African Origins of Pan-Africanism. You can see that on Bibi Tunikata, the video. So I sent him the manuscript. At this point, it's about 50-some pages. And we were deciding, are we going to trim it down to article size, or are we going to blow it up to book size? And we're going to blow it up. So anyway, the basic point that is being argued is that this idea of Pan-Africanism isn't a new thing. So people talk about the Pan-African Conference in 1900, the Pan-African Congress in, 1919, whatever. And, at best, people try to take it back to Paul Cuffey from the U.S., trying to come back to the U.S. and those types of things. Edward Wilmot Blyden, Martin Delany. But if you look at the objectives of Pan-Africanism, you're talking about various types of African people under a single political system, under a single economic system, single so forth and so on. You can continue on. And that as an objective isn't a new thing. So what we're looking at specifically is going to ancient Kemet and looking at the unification of the two lands as the most ancient example of Pan-Africanism, of uniting different types of African people under one common umbrella, and saying that is the core of Pan-Africanism. And not only that, when they were unifying, they were doing it for a specific purpose, usually to fight off the Asiatics who are trying to come into Kemet. So you can read the inscription of Winnie, and I cite all these primary texts where they're saying we brought together the Wawat Nubians, the Erjet Nubians, the Sejer Nubians, these Nubians, both sides of the two lands, these Africans from the western oases, boom, 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 in order to keep the Asiatics at bay, right? You can find this time and time again, different inscriptions, Merim Patah, Stele, so forth and so on, all the way up until around the time of Amos kicked out the Hyksos. We're talking about very late now. And then Jehudi Mes started incorporating these Asiatics in, and now they have all of so-called North Africa now from those decisions that were made at that point in time. So I sent that to him, and he said, I've read it. In general, it makes a point I've been stating for some time, most recently in Remembering the Dismembered Continent, that African unity is an ancient concept, now largely forgotten, especially by those who hold Pan-African conferences and hotels. Agreement then overall, you could include Sogolo Njata's organization of the Malian Federation as an example. Also the work done by Okomfa Anoche as intellectual unifier and Osei Tutu as military and political unifier. In South Africa, don't forget there was Dingiswayo, who wanted diplomatic unification, as his ward Shaka, who went for military incorporation into a new united society. It is possible to go earlier than pre-dynastic Kemet, but there you would have to move from political analysis into philosophy. The pre-dynastic myth cycle of Usir, Osiris, Osar, Oset, Nebetet, and Seth was about unity and disintegration as life and death processes, right? So I say the concept unity as desirable life aim is older and deeper than its social and political extensions. All this reinforces your argument. It's not intended to undercut it. So I'll come there. Now, in my response to him, we'll come back to what he was saying. In my response to it, I say, also, there was a point about the Berlin Conference. We'll come back. I'm glad that you read it and so quickly. I have to admit that while I've heard of remembering the dismembered continent, I haven't got a chance to read it, so forth and so on. Like others, specifically Job and Obenga, I see in Medu Necha a potential solution to the problem of my neighbor's language isn't my language, so let's all remain under Eurasian hegemony. In our manuscript, we focus on Kemet specifically because of its meaning as land of black people. That's the core point that differentiates it from what Shaka was doing, Dingiswai was doing, so forth and so on. But I'll come back. While I agree that all of the examples that you mentioned could qualify as Pan-Africanism, the thing that makes Kemet so much of a model is that it shows the model for Africans equals blacks and blacks equals Africans, with all of the implications of what that meant regarding policy toward Eurasian invaders and our land. As is clear, this has implications for discussions of continental Pan-Africanism, which is saying let's unite with our very first imperialists and invaders who are on stolen land in northern Africa. Let's incorporate those, which incorporates Eurasian invaders of various ilks, including Arabs, Dutch, Boers, etc. The lesson here is essentially the same argued for by Chancellor Williams, as has been made clear by repeated attempts to ignore these lessons, leading to our continued suffering at the hands of Eurasians. So this idea of let's incorporate Eurasians isn't a new one. We've done that 1,000 times, and every single time we got the exact same results. Somehow we're still ahistorically advocating for the same thing that we did time and time and time and time again, and we're saying hypothetically, you know what, I have a new idea. Let's incorporate Eurasia. It's like, were you not paying attention to the last 10,000 years? You see what I'm saying? So, Kemet is, for us in the manuscript, the most useful example of this ancient Pan-Africanism, because it's not only pro-African, it's also anti-African. It's the enemy of African people. And all of that is built into the Constitution that Kemet means land of black people. So that has implications of what you do when these Asiatic invaders are trying to encroach on your land. You prevent them, and you get together a Pan-African military, political force in order to keep them at bay. The second you abandon that is the time that Kemet goes onto the decline, and that these Asiatics overrun all of North Africa and are continuing down in their, what we would call these, in their various agents called Boko Haram and whatever else you want to call them, right? That, what you're seeing now is the result of saying, you know what, let's get rid of that policy of this is land of black people, and now let's start incorporating anti-Africans. It's like saying, here I have this body. Again, he's talking about the body as a whole. Now I'm saying, now let me go drink some poison. You're saying, let me take something into my system that is designed to destroy me. Let me take in this virus. You understand? A parasitic virus. It doesn't want my well-being. It wants to survive. It wants to multiply. It wants to do everything at the expense of the host body. You understand? So that was our response to him. I mentioned the Berlin Conference in the text, and he was like, oh, we shouldn't do what the Berlin Conference did because that's division. And I was saying, as far as the Berlin Conference, I see it as a race-first redrawing of the battle lines. 14 Eurasian and Neo-Eurasian, I'm talking about America, so forth. Nation states against Africa and African/black people. I see ancient Kemet as the original race-first drawing of the battle lines. So when you say Kemet, you're saying these are the battle lines. And you remember seeing the mural of the races, where they showed the Africans in Kemet the same as the Africans in Nubia, but they have very vastly distinct versions of what they showed the Asiatics to look like, right? So they're very clear when we say these are the people of Kemet. So that's the original race-first drawing of the battle lines. Other empires, while focused on unity, seem to be comparatively less focused on a race-first type of unity, which excluded our Eurasian enemy in terms of the actual constitution. I'm not arguing for continued fragmentation in terms of the results of the Berlin Conference. I'm calling for recognition of the global battle lines that came out very clearly in that conference, as well as a recognition of our past, current, and future enemies, particularly in the form of Eurasian. Once we can correctly identify our external enemies, this can serve as an impetus to our unification, as it served this purpose in the so-called Old Kingdom. The discarding of these core principles, which served as a type of glue, as well as an enemy repellent, was part and parcel of the destruction of African/black civilization in my view. This comes back to the point of destiny. The multiple selves, the multiple parts of the human being are together for what reason? To assist you in fulfilling your destiny. When you have a mission, that's the reason why you're all staying together. The home is together with the sum is together with the kra, so that you can fulfill your destiny. When we're talking about unification, what's the point of unification if there isn't some type of objective? So Kemet was able to stay unified for 3,000 years, and the majority of that time, the objective was to make sure this is the land of black people and to keep out our Eurasian enemy. So you can look at Kemet as a body that had a mission, and as long as it was there to fulfill its mission, the parts were able to stay together, the multiple cells were able to stay together. As soon as it diverged from its mission, that the Kra went away and it dissolved, all the different parts went back. The Honam went back to the soil, the Kra went back to Anyame, the Sum went back to the father's house, the Honhom went back to the Mframa. Right? Why are we staying together if we don't have a mission? So when we're talking about anti-Eurasians who are anti-African by definition, we're talking about we're coming up with what the mission is going to be, reclaiming that ancient mission from Kemet on the basis of historical realities, not hypothetical. Oh, maybe all the workers of the world will unite and socialist utopia. Let's try to incorporate the Eurasians again. It's like, weren't you paying attention? No, but Marx said Marx isn't going to tell you anything that is going to say, let's bring justice to these Eurasians. Marx is a Eurasian, so he's not going to come up with any ideology that's saying, let's bring justice to our enemies for what they did. What did the Germans do in Namibia? What does Marx have to say about what we should do to the German people for what they did in Namibia? He's silent on that, and he will remain silent on that. I hope you're following me. So, all of this is to say, no problem. And we'll wrap it up, but I did want us to briefly touch on the Armah Talk in the context of what we're talking about. So to come back to the point that you were making, Kweku, you were saying, basically, it comes back to this idea of destiny. And there's this proverb that we mentioned in class before, in terms of, how can we do it? How can we come together if we weren't homogeneous and all of these types of things? That there's a proverb in Krabiano which is to say that in Krabia, the destiny, the mission reveals itself clearly in the living of one's life, right? So how can you start coming up with the answer if you aren't even trying to do it? You're sitting abstractly like, oh, it's impossible to do, so let's just stay with the Eurasian thing that we do. How many people know about the governance structure of ancient Congo? Here in the classroom. How many people know about the intricacies of the governance structure in ancient Meroe? Aksum. How many people here know the governance structure of Kush? Of Kemet? Can someone break down what the Tati did in relationship to the Nesu? Anyone? Alright. Who can tell me about the governance structure of let me not belabor the point. How can you choose what is best of the African thing if you don't know anything about the African thing? This is the point. You know everything about everything Eurasian. If I ask you British Parliament, okay, you can run that down. If I ask you the U.S. Congress, yes, you can run that down. If I ask you about French, whatever, you can run that down. Italian, you can go to Greek, you can go to Roman, you can run all of that down. Now you're saying hypothetically, let's use the best of the Western thing and the best of the African thing. However, your source of information, you have no information on the African thing. You have all the information about the Eurasian thing. So how are you going to pretend like you are going to choose equally amongst them? You have to go to the primary sources and read Mbongi and learn what the Congo governance structure was. You have
Maybe
to.
That's what he meant by saying they were in a hurry. They were in a rush.
That's the point. And this is the point when we look at. We had a thread over the past few days on a Bibi to Mikasa as well, about can you teach what you don't know? So if we're going to fault Nkrumah, how is he going to teach us? If we were able to go in a time warp and I asked him those same questions, tell me about the governance structure of Kush. How many people think he would be able to run it down for me? How many people think he would be able to run down the governance structure of Meroe? Of Congo. That's the thing. If you read Conscientism, he's running down every single Greek scholar you would ever want to know. Now quote the African scholar. Quote Ptahhotep, not a quote. They're very broad platitudes. Well, in Africa, we're collective. But now, let's say he can't teach what he doesn't know. But now when you read his speech, the African Genius speech, he's saying we need to learn about African governance structures. He's admitting, I don't know it. But at some point in time, in 2016, there's going to be a Foundations of African Thought class. And these students here are going to heed my call and say, how can we choose the African thing if we know nothing about the African thing? And that is giving you your mission, right? If we're talking about we're going to solve the problems of the African continent, we're going to do anything useful, we need some tools. We need some resources. A person whose only tool is a hammer will treat everything like a nail, right? Well, what if you need a screwdriver? I need an African screwdriver from South Africa, Umzansi. You don't have it. Well, you need to go get it. So this is again coming back to the necessity of African studies, because without that, you'll just do exactly what we're critiquing and what we want to critique Nkrumah about. But if you are doing it, can you do any better than Nkrumah? If we're talking about African worldview, African philosophy, who are you going to cite other than Socrates, Aristotle? You can go back to Thales, Plato, whoever you want to know. Who are you citing other than that? Give me the quote of the African. What did we write down? Aikwe Armah did Sanhat and translated it into Zulu, Fanti, Kikongo, Wolof, and then he has the Eurasian languages there too. We can read about this official from ancient Kemet, and you can download the PDF if you actually want to read it. You can read it in Fanti.
More than that.
You see? Right? So we can learn about what his role was as an official if we are willing to not be afraid to actually engage those texts. So we'll read Greek texts till the cows come home. We'll read the Roman text. We'll kiss the Pope's ring. But your African ancestors who dragged this boulder 2,000 miles, carved into the boulder 4 inches deep, because they said, I want to make sure my descendants read this. This is the most important thing to me. I need to make sure my descendants read it. Now your descendants are here. Now you can download that on PDF. What I dragged for 2,000 miles, you can read that on PDF. And you're like, oh, let's just choose the best from the West and the best from Africa without any resources from Africa to pull from. Right? So this is coming back to just this idea of destiny, collective destiny as well. What's the point? Right? What's the point of us saying let's unite if we don't understand we have a common enemy who's trying to destroy us? Why are we going to stay together? I don't have a mission. Why does an Asante and a Yoruba need to do anything with each other unless there is a common enemy who wants to commit genocide against both of them? They just had a conference in France about how to tackle the problem of overpopulation in Africa, eugenics, genocide. And one of the white people there, if we want to call them people, said, I'm not saying necessarily that we need to drop a nuclear bomb on them, but we need to make sure that their population is under control and brought down. Bill Gates has expressed similar things. If you go back to the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Louise Sanger, you know about Planned Parenthood, that she was a eugenicist. She used to go to Ku Klux Klan rallies and say we need to make sure that the Negroes don't get word that this is all about eugenics and getting them off of the face of the planet.
That's one of the modified family planning.
To family planning. And that's what Planned Parenthood is doing now, right? So that gives you a destiny. that gives you a mission and a purpose to come together. If the Akan person, the Ga person, the Ewe person, the Bangba person, the Yoruba person, the whoever person knows that we have a common enemy who wants to wipe all of us off of the face of the planet, now you have the multiple selves who have a reason to come together and stay together, at least until you fulfill your mission, on analogy with a human being. Once you're done, like Aikwe Armah says, he said, once I get done with this book and this book, now I can go off and join the ancestors. I've made my contribution. Now the different parts can return to their source. Well, it's the same on a collective level. Why are the parts going to be together unless they have this? So you need to be willing to take it up. The answers will come in the actual process of doing it. What language will it be? People, like I said, in the States are doing it. And they're not asking for permission, they're not asking no questions, they're saying we're just doing it.
And interestingly, South Africa is doing it. I talked to this girl and she's like, since they all 11 are languages and they go to school and they all speak. So she's like, sometimes if I want to pick someone, I'll say it in like 3 languages. She's like, yeah, that's how to communicate. So
now, that would be South Africanization or Umzansianization. When we're talking about what we're talking about on the African level, you're saying I'm going beyond the Berlin Conference boundaries. So even if we're saying let's combine Ga and Ewe and whatever, Dagare and whatever, we're only still talking about within what those cave beasts said at the Berlin Conference, right? So at a certain point, if you're saying that we're going to go against that cave beast collective that didn't just say France, let's bring together all these indigenous French languages. They said Russia, come. United States, come. Belgium, come. Belgium, you're about as big as this room. You two come. Denmark, you're as big as this institute. You two come. You understand? That's race first. Right? So if we're talking about my father often says that you can't defeat a system with a program. So if you're going up against a pan-Eurasian system, then you need to be talking about a global African solution beyond, they decided to dump me within these borders and I'm just going to stick with what they allowed me to have. I hope we're clear.
But buttressing on Portia's point about a snobbery of languages, I've seen people who can't speak English to their children, and that's the worst thing they ever do. Their English is horrible, and it goes back to your thing about the snobbery, because speaking English seems to be puts you in a certain pedestal. Now, I was just telling Akosia tonight that it's a show I'd like to watch on TV, but I never get to watch it on Saturday. Akosia Schwarzenegger, or whatever it is. Right? And I'll tell you why. She's what we call a foam bush.
I like how you went there.
It's a foam bush. But she does it with a lot of style. And that show, and anytime I see that 5-minute or 3-minute advert, I think, damn, I'd love to watch this show, because at least I'd laugh rather than watch all of these people with pseudo accents, the fake American, fake Ghanaian Lafa accent, trying to talk about things that they have no clue about whatsoever. And this girl really talks about the man moving his clothes, he's being moved out of his home, and all his stuff packed in a Kia truck, which is visual, which we all have experience of and we see all the time on our roads. So we have all these people who have these ideas of enlightenment. When you look down on the cocoa farmer, who's truly the really enlightened one and the real educated one, because he has never been to the schools of higher learning, but he has the learning of nature and an understanding of his trade. And he knows that when I plant the cocoa today, in 6 months' time I'm going to do this and he's got this craft to the T.
Okay.
Such a person doesn't really have a lot of letters after his name, or the fellow, when they ask them and address a seminar at IAS. But they have a lot of knowledge. That is I mean, and you're talking about that Pan-Africanism started a long time. When you look at the cardinals of Mahat, you see the principles of Pan-Africanism now started in 1900s. You know, all in there.
Yeah.
So you're right. You can equally argue that it started there.
Yeah. And, you know, to look at, deal with the enemy as a mission, we're really focusing in on what is going to keep us united. And that's the reason to be united. Otherwise, what are we doing? What's the point? You say, you do your thing, I do my thing, whatever. But again, if this guy comes in here with an AK-47,
I will run.
we will see that whether it's fight or flight, we have a common situation for a common enemy. We need to come up with some type of common solution. Either we all go towards him or we all go away from him. You understand? That's very visual. I was looking at a video, and there were these two antelopes that were butting heads, right? Out of the corner of the screen comes a lion. Now, the lion isn't saying, oh, this is a Nigerian antelope, and this is a Ghanaian antelope. I know they don't like each other. Both of you are food. That's what the Berlin Conference was, right? You think you're Ewe, you think you're Asante, I don't care what you think you are. All of you are food. All of you all are food. So once you start being intelligent, but what oftentimes people say is, oh, we don't have any enemy. What they're basically saying is there's no reason to come together. It's all right if they pick us off one by one. Because I'm unwilling to say let's deal with this common enemy and give ourselves a common mission, and that will give us the impetus to come together to deal with this enemy on the face of the planet Earth.
So I've given you, I can understand your thing about and looking back in hindsight, I can understand why we had no choice but to stick to the existing system of governance. But that existing system of governance, if like you said, if we had that knowledge of kin, then we would take some of the cardinal rules. We know that, well, this money is supposed to be for the hospital, so let's do the hospital, let's do the schools, let's do the right thing, because that's all it is about. You know, so long as we do the right things, then we're fine.
Let me give you an example. I mentioned Machiavelli. Mobutu Sese Seko was an avid reader of Nicolas Machiavelli, right?
Yeah.
And if you read what he did to Pierre Mulele, who led the Simba Rebellion, so it was crushed by the Congolese army assisted by Belgium, France, and to some degree logistics from the United States, right? So Pierre Mulele, who was the ideological descendant of Lumumba, has some Maoist tendencies, trained in China, whatever. He ran to Congo Brazzaville. This is around 1964. 1968, Mobutu decides, you know what, we're going to grant amnesty to you. This is someone who reads Machiavelli avidly. So he says, we're going to grant you amnesty. So he made sure that he was out of the country in Morocco somewhere, and he has his right-hand people to accept him into the country. So he crosses the Congo River. They wine him and dine him, champagne, caviar. Mobutu comes back, and he says, guess what? There will be no amnesty. We're going to try you as a war criminal. They tried him in one day, I want to say, on like the 8th, and then they executed him on the 9th. How did they execute him? They gouged out both of his eyes. They ripped off his genitals while he was still living. They amputated him limb by limb, one by one, publicly in front of everyone. Right? Arm, rip it out. Let me hear you scream. Leg, rip it out. Let me hear you scream. Arm, leg, head. Then they dumped what was left into the Congo River. So this is someone who reads Eurasian thought. His brain is filled with Eurasian thought. He hasn't read the instructions of Ptah-hotep. Now, if he had grown up his whole life reading the instructions of Ptah-hotep, he would have had a vastly different response. Because how does Ptah-hotep deal with it? He tells you how to interact with your peers. with your superiors, with your subordinates, in order to ensure that ma'at is done to each one, not to abuse your position, all of these things. Imagine if he grew up from childhood, from creche, reading that type of wisdom literature. But that's not what this is why we need African studies. Because if you're reading Machiavelli, you will become a white person in black skin, and we say that almost cliche. But how did that white person in black skin impact Pierre Mulele? You understand? People are losing their lives because these are cave beasts running around, running African countries. So if you don't know anything African, how can you pull? If I went back in time to Mobutu, before he died of prostate cancer because he was raping all the virgins throughout the countryside, if I could go back in time and say, "Oh, Mobutu, have you read the instructions of Ptahhotep?" Do you think he would say yes? Was he choosing the best from the West and the best from Africa? And decide, you know what, let me just choose the Machiavelli. I have the two, but I'm just going to choose the Machiavelli one. He's never even heard of that. You understand? So for all of us, a friend of mine, there's a scholar named Manu Ampim, and one of the users on a BB Mikasa said he was going to send a text that Professor Manu Ampim wrote on the importance and the methodology for primary source research. And once I get it, I'll make it available as I can. Primary source research. Primary source research. Go back and read the actual text. What did the Greeks say? If you want to say the Greeks invented philosophy, what did they themselves say? Oh, I went down to Kemet and I spent 6 drachma for the ferry ride there. What did they say? If you don't have access to that source text, you just go with what your Eurasians are telling you. If you can't go to the Kemetic text, you just say, oh, whatever they say. These are just white-skinned black people. So not to belabor this point, but I did want us to sit briefly and reflect on what Armah had to say, especially in how it relates to the readings. The most clear thing is in terms of the importance of African studies. When I say African studies, I'm not saying go to your village. When I'm saying African studies, I'm not saying stay within the boundaries of Ghana. A cow grazes where it is tied. Are you cows? So why are we still staying in those Berlin Conference borders? If we're saying that the political system of your ethnic group in Ghana is bad, let's just say it's bad. Let's look at Zimbabwe. Let's look at Monomotapa. You understand? But we have to first know it before we can choose anything from it. You understand? We have to look at Kilwa, even some of these more recent ones like that. But how can we even discuss it on the table if it's never even been put on the table? It's beyond bounds. The quote is, the one who determines the circumference of your knowledge, the one who gives you the diameter of your knowledge prescribes the circumference of your activity. So if you're only this far out, then you're going to stay in this little circle. That's your knowledge. Machiavelli. Right? But what if you have all of this to actually choose from? Then you can be honest and say, you know what? Let's pick the best of the West. I wouldn't even have a problem with you saying that if you were actually doing that, but all you know is Eurasian stuff. So by default, what are you doing? What's every single thing you're going to pick? All right. So let's come to the class and the arrangement of the class. Next week we're going to deal with common elements in African cosmology. We are now a week behind, but because of today we are somehow ahead because we're able to deal with some very good concepts that are part of our objective of the course. It's more than just let's get through the slides, let's get through the chapters, let's get some understanding of what we need to understand as African people, right? So we are going to look at common elements in African cosmology. Has everyone read this? 131 to 144. It's very short. This is really the core of the text. Why it's essential to do African studies, the global African world, a comparative analysis rather than an atomic analysis, which is why your Eurasian enemy wants you to do an atomic analysis. And even this morning, I was looking at the different topics, and I was looking at the person's name and what their topic was. Usually the topic related to whatever their ethnic group was. Usually not 100% of the time. But I was lamenting to some degree about that. Because if we're talking about doing, to a degree you can say it makes sense. Who can possibly do better research on this ethnic group than the person who comes from it? You can argue that, right? But in the larger context of what we're talking about, the necessity of African studies, I would want an Akan person to do Ga studies. I want a Ga person to do Dagare studies. I want a Dagare person to do Yoruba studies. I want a Yoruba person to do Wolof studies. You understand? That's what Job was looking at. That's what Obenga was looking at. Because that's what Aikwe Armah was doing. I'm going to Tanzania. Before I was in South Africa. Before I was in North Africa. Now I'm in Senegal. That's an African. Y'all aren't African yet. That's an African. That's an ideal to which someone should aspire. You understand? That's an ideal to which someone should aspire. To actually be an African in practice. You understand? So that's what I would like to see. So I'm not saying go change your topics at all. But in the future, when we're talking about comparative analysis, when we're talking about going beyond Ghana studies, when we're doing Ghana studies, we're saying Berlin Conference studies. This is what they gave me. Thank you, white man. I will stay just where you put me. Or pre-colonial fragments. Neo-colonial fragments or pre-colonial fragments. But we're not. And that's what we were talking about in the chapter that went into schizophrenia. What is it but misalignment of the selves? They don't know why they should be together, so they can't make sense of anything. You understand? This one is thinking, this is the most important. The left and the right are completely separate. You understand? This is what our scholarship has become. It's schizophrenia scholarship. And what I would advocate, I didn't advocate it this morning. I was just sitting there and lamenting. Yeah, it was. I was sitting there lamenting. The Ga guy is going to do Ga studies. The Ewe guy is going to do Ewe studies. The Akan guy is going to do Akan studies. When do we get to? The Christian is going to talk about Christian studies. The Quo is going to do a Quo. So I was sitting there, I was like, let me not lighten to this guy because it's not his fault. How can he discuss anything but Christianity and Islam? He knows nothing other than Christianity and Islam. So how could I charge him to say, talk about Kemet, talk about Hatshepsut? He said, did you sneeze? What is that? He doesn't know what Hatshepsut is. He hasn't heard of Amani Renas. He hasn't heard of Nzenga. He hasn't heard of Aline Sitwe Jata. He hasn't heard of Yanenga. If he's heard of Amina, perhaps, because he knows some Hausa people. But how can you, I might have asked, but how can you draw from something you know nothing about? You understand? It's not even fair game.
As students, we tend to align ourselves not to courses that will critically think, and thereafter when we are out of this institution, we are able to confront the world, even intrinsically, have some transformation in our psyche and in our soul. What we are looking for is just, passing, get an A or a B.
Sorry, I will not blame students.
That is not it.
The thing is, we are attached to like advisors, supervisors, and then you work with them. Actually, you realize that what you are doing is what he wants you to do. Like, for example, Aikwe Armah is speaking, I don't know, but then how many of your lectures do you find there? I'm asking, and then with all of these like talks, and that's one thing I realized that.
And you're not changing your mind.
Yes, but you try.
Because it is not only one, the main supervisor or the supervisors that you are attached to that you must learn from.
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah,
Then
think about that.
You have
all the fellows are supposed to.
So you should be able to work on everybody's stuff.
Else, I don't know. I'm just saying.
So he says, and then
maybe you'll be better off trying other people too.
Yes, maybe.
Taking to that panel.
I would say this, and we were talking about this with the hidden colors. So each night, some of the fellows were there, some of the fellows were not there. So we could lament that, oh, some of these fellows aren't there, or we could celebrate and say this gives us an opportunity to deal with things that perhaps those fellows who are voluntarily absenting themselves from it, perhaps they wouldn't bring that type of perspective. Perhaps we couldn't have this level of talk if others were here. You understand? So by the same token, you can say, all right, I'll put it like this. My father used to, growing up, he used to always say, never let school get in the way of your education. Right? So you're going to get your degree or whatever, but you can read beyond what your supervisor is telling you. And even as you are doing, like for me, for my master's thesis, I was doing a comparative analysis between Akan and Yoruba, doing historical linguistics, comparative linguistics. Now, my overarching purpose in doing that was to tie both of those back to Kemet, because the only place where both of those came from the same sources when we were all in the Nile Valley. Of course, I didn't say that outright because I had one of the worst house Negro supervisors on the planet, married to a white guy, the most Christian. Let me give me the white Jesus. I don't want the black one. Give me the white one. You understand? So if I was tying it back to Kemet, I would have had problems trying to get my master's. And then for my PhD, but the reason why I was sent, my Medu Neter instructor in undergrad sent me to grad school to get the contemporary African languages so that we can tie them back to what? Medu Neter. So that was the seed time, that was the groundwork. So I'm still getting the information that's going to tie back to my ultimate objective, but I'm not telling them that that's why I'm getting all this information on Akan cognates with Yoruba cognates, right? Now I'm here doing my PhD, and my supervisor tells me, look at Akan, serial verb nominalization in Akan. So I'm looking at 3 different dialects. I'm getting methodology. I'm getting field research techniques. I'm getting all these things. I'm still not saying the reason why I'm doing all this, the reason why I was sent to grad school in the whole first place was to get all of these African languages to tie them back to Kemet. I don't need to tell them any of that. I just need to get the information that's going to help me with this goal. Now we're starting up this Medu Neter revitalization group, and my first Medu Neter teacher who sent me to grad school for this purpose is part of it. And this is our first time really even interacting since he sent me on this mission. You understand? So when we're talking about Nkrabia, we're talking about mission, you have to be very clear. And when you're very clear, there's a movie called The Spook Who Sat by the Door, where the guy goes into the CIA, he does all this house Negro stuff, but he's going in there to get weapons, explosive training, all this other stuff. He gets out and starts a revolution in the U.S. and sets up cells all throughout there. So they're fighting Vietnam on one side, they're fighting internally, and they can't win either, and it crushes the U.S. both internally and externally. So he went in there with an objective. So with you, when you know what your objective is, if it's a Pan-African objective, and you find your supervisor isn't down with that and wouldn't let you get your degree, you get through it and you say, oh, wonderful, this thing that he did give me, I can use that for what my real objective is. Oh, this technique, this methodology, oh, this theory, I can use that for what I'm actually doing. Then at the end of the day, when you have your PhD and you're sitting here teaching foundations of African thought, you can bring to bear all that stuff that was your whole original intent in the first place. And you can have not only debates about, well, what language is going to be, you can be a participant in both sides of that, the organic one there and then the intentional one here. Right? So never let school get in the way of your education is the point. Okay. So again, this is to me it's one of the shortest but one of the most important chapters, common elements in African cosmology, and that's the point of all of this stuff, to show the common worldview, right? So the primeval water, life force, the void and continuum, you all are looking tired, we'll close up very shortly. Transmission of the life force, we find that throughout the entire continent, right? The 4 primordial elements or ancestors, in some cases 8, where you have male and female twins, 4 this side, 4 that side, all throughout the continent, right? and also associated with the elements earth, fire, air, water, right? In the text, I like how he breaks down, they say it comes from the Greeks, but if the Greeks go back about a couple thousand years, they would read exactly what they were supposed to have invented, inscribed into stone. What are we talking about when we're talking about Shu, Tefnut, Nut, Geb, but the 4 elements? And you're telling me some Greek in 500 BC invented what we were talking about and inscribed? Not only like we were just coming up with the idea, it was so profound we inscribed it in stone. That's how well accepted it was as a concept. Alright, let's not belabor that, we'll deal with it. Chaos and order, we found that all throughout the continent, right? This is how we're making sense of this stuff, right? Concert of opposites, this idea of complements, right? That's core. You find it throughout the continent, throughout space, throughout time. Also the idea of divine intelligence, logos, and word. That's why after you do the libation, you will say Monikasa. That's why you say Yao or Ezio. Whatever you say is because of the power of the word. That's why you even do the libation in the first place. That's why the Yoruba say Ashe. Right? So the Greeks invented they weren't even on the planet when we were doing this. There was nothing called a Greek. They were crawling around hitting themselves with clubs in a cave somewhere. There was nothing called a Greek. So how are you inventing something, clubbing yourself upside the head, eating your neighbor's children? What are you inventing? Alright, so the text, person, divinity, and nature. Also look at Sekanta Job. That's what I recommended downstairs this morning. Cultural unity of Black Africa, looking for the northern cradle and southern cradle theory. Also Medu Necher by Diego Corrales. You have the whole text. I want you to look at the section on the divine word, the significance of the word. Also D. Martin, I want you to read that in full. It's a short article, just a few pages, a little bit more than a few. Ma'at and Order in African Cosmology, a conceptual tool for understanding indigenous knowledge. Right? All of that is in the folder. I'll check to make sure the drive, I tend to update the Dropbox folder because it's instantaneous syncing, and the Google Drive takes longer because I have 100 gigs and it can scan everything before it wants to sync, and that could be a problem. So go to the Dropbox folder as your first run. If you don't see it there, you'll get it from the Google Drive folder. But all of this is there. If you want to have African political systems to pull from, it's in this folder. Beyond the folder, you can go beyond the folder. And I know some of you do that anyway, so it's whatever. Yeah, Sheikh Anta Diop. Yeah. It's all in there. It's all in the folder.
Are we reading the domains of it? No, not like a subtitle.
Yeah. Actually, let me pull it up.
That section.
It's a section. Let me pull it up. I want you to go to. He discusses actually the whole thing, but he comes to a point where he discusses this idea of what's generally called the northern cradle and the southern cradle. This is the other text that I mentioned this morning, African Origin of Civilization. There we go. You all have a gold mine in this folder of African thought. You have a gold mine because some of these are texts you can't get anywhere. And me myself, I went to a library. I'm pulling. This is from Dropbox. Okay. Some of these I went to the library to scan them in myself.
Yeah, and especially the from Domko's book, I've been looking for it for years.
That's my own text. So I want you to look at Southern Cradle and Matriarchy. That's page 27 to 33. And then the Northern Cradle, I want you to look from I want you to look from 64 to let's go from 64 to 89. Actually, I want you to look at that whole section as well. In an ideal world, as though you don't have any other classes, I want you to go through from 5 to 100. 5 to 103. That's in an ideal world. Without the ideal world, which is the one that we live in, 27 to 34. And then yeah, let's do that. If you can at least do that, that would be good. And then we can have something to work with. Where are you? I'm not saying what you saw.
I think I saw a name like Ifi Amaju.
Yeah. From the introduction.
She wrote that.
Yeah. Here comes the Job's theory of matriarchal values as the basis for African cultural unity. Oh, is it? Are you serious or you're joking? Oh, I didn't know. I actually didn't know that he was Ivor Wilkes' son. Not until Ivor Wilkes died, and I was like, what? I didn't say that explains anything, but I found that to be interesting.
And I think his brother, the BBC, used Armah Talk.
Even the diesel,
and check this out real quick. These are different images, cosmograms. So we introduced the one from Congo. We also introduced the Dendera, the calendar that goes through the different what you call zodiac signs from Kemet. Also, you'll find similar one among the Dagara. You'll find a similar one amongst the Dogon, which is the bottom left. Find similar one amongst the Igbo. That this is our conception of reality, space, time, matter. Europeans finally got that the Earth is round. Okay, give them a round of applause. Thank you. You've updated that one. What of time? No, you're still on timelines, right? They're yet to come up with the timelines, come off of that. Or matter. They say the universe perhaps is flat. Maybe it looks flat to them. You don't know? I've seen 3 different models where one is like spherical, another one is completely flat, and someone is between the two where it looks sort of like a loaf of bread. We'll actually cover some of those things in terms of the makeup of the universe in the same lecture. All right, so we'll close out there. I hope everyone got something from Aikwe Armah once we got the technical issues resolved. That is wonderful.
No, a question came to mind, and sorry if I'm holding you here, but when you said that, I don't know if it's been discussed yet, but I found it very interesting. That you said that although Nkrumah was a good man, he finds it difficult to accept why he accepted the colonial administration.
Yeah, we discussed that briefly.
We discussed it. No, I was too tired. I couldn't.
I'm recording, so you can go back and check it out. Okay. If you have something pointed or specific about it.
It seems he only said instead of an African type of governance, he opted for the colonial one. I wish I could ask him to shed some more light on what he meant by that.
Yeah, we did. We did discuss that, but that was a segue into our point of how can you choose something that you know nothing about. Again, for many of us on the continent, I'll say the continent more than the diaspora, but also in the diaspora to some degree. You have this. This is where I came from. This is the West, quote unquote, UK, US. All I know about is my village, and I know about this one. I may even know different points here: France, Italy, Germany, whatever. So my two options are: I can go forward to the West, or I can go back to my village. Right? What we're talking about is, now this tends to be the view from the diaspora. So I'll look at, let's say, the Western Hemisphere diaspora in particular. Also, we had a discussion where someone from the Eastern Hemisphere diaspora was talking. But let's just, for the sake of this illustration, in the Western Hemisphere diaspora, we're looking here. When we look at Africa, we're looking at all these different points, which is why modern day Pan-Africanism tends to be of that thing. What I was talking about, people speaking African, where they know one word from 100 languages. Right? Because that's the view. I'm looking here at the African continent. It's sort of like your eye is on your face. So it may need some assistance from someone in the diaspora as a mirror for you to see the rest of your face. If I tell you, oh, you have something on your face, you're looking like this. Because you see out there, but you have a hard time seeing what's here. So this is a paradigm that I want for us to question. My village or the West, those are the only two options. And look more so of what Armah was talking about he did. I went to this place, I went to that place, I went to this place, I went to the diaspora, I was teaching there, I was there. That's an African. That's a real African. Don't call yourself African until you start doing what Ike Armah is doing. Even if you don't come to the same conclusions, do what he's doing. Even from your desktop, from your book, from your reading. If you don't got the money for a ticket to fly, do what he's saying, do conceptually. That's when you'll start to think like an African. When I say think like an African, I'm not saying think like Asante or Achim or Fanti or Ewe or Anlo or whatever. I'm saying the global African world. That's when you start thinking like an African. That's when you start thinking about why we need to unite, why we have a common enemy who's trying to kill out all of us. They're not saying, at the Berlin Conference, they didn't say, oh, you know what, let's just enslave the Fantis. That's it. Let's leave the Asantes alone. Did they say that at the Berlin Conference?
No, they just think, I want this one.
They say, all of you are food.
We don't care who lives there.
All of you are food. So if you want to counter or conquer someone who says all of you are food and they plan on cannibalizing you, you need to start thinking like a group that's saying we have a mission.
Yeah.
We have something that we have to deal with. Otherwise, they're eating my hand today and your foot tomorrow. We're in the same pot cooking.
They're really doing that.
Oh yeah. All right, y'all. So good session. I appreciate you all staying after, so we can discuss some of these things. Read ahead of time. I will not tell you that there will be a quiz.
Is it that, we have no choice? We're going to have passed through these kind of, processes before anything?
This is coming back to the understanding of, much broader understanding. So destiny is like a guiding line, right? So it's not fate. So when you read about destiny, look at all of those things on an individual level, and then try to, by analogy, apply them to what we're seeing on a collective level. So the specific way it's going to manifest could be anything. This is a time of water. We're just seeing very clearly what that time of water is going to be, right? There are places that you could walk on just like a couple of decades ago that are underwater completely. There are islands that have been submerged. Now, there are people who would just look at it, look, we're burning fossil fuels, and that's what's happening, boom, boom. And they're not thinking about it in terms of these much grander scales. So let's say if we didn't burn fossil fuels, which we have been doing, which we still are doing, it may manifest in a different type of way. There may be all types of well springs, We may have decided, the prologue to 2000 Seasons talks about spring water flowing towards the desert, right? We may have chosen to do something entirely different. Let's say we blocked off the Asiatics from ever coming into Africa, right? And we say, you know what? This place that has become a desert, let's do irrigation and reclaim all of that desert land. Let's plant 2 billion trees and make that into a forest.
I was thinking also, like this fast land, why don't we do something? Because you could go to maybe one village to the next, and then say, this is why
expense. Yeah.
Do something.
Right. But just saying that on analogy, that if we chose differently, and never let, if Jehuti said, I'm not marrying any Asiatic princesses, I'm not allowing them to come into court. This is timid land of the black people, they must stay out, just like our ancestors said. We could have an entirely different scenario. Then the age of Hapi, or Manat, the water-bringing nurse, could look like an entirely different thing. You could have waterfalls in the middle of the Sahara Desert. All the deserts of the continent could be nothing but water. And then you have a different manifestation of that water bringer.
So in this case, this is much more like, because we've done wrong in the past, the consequence will be that.
Not just for that.
Which is you again.
Exactly.
So a lot to consider, but it becomes very simple when you're able to narrow it down to core ideas and principles. And that's why I like the book, because it brings everything down to a core worldview. Now you can understand everything as the manifestation of it. In the chapter on the Creator, it talks about the Supreme Being as one with many arms. So there are different manifestations, but everything all put together is one thing. It just looks different. So you look different from you, we look different from this, but at one point in time it was all part of Nun, the primordial waters. Everything we see here was transformed, it was just a different form. Now it's been ordered into a specific way to look like different things, but on a fundamental level everything is connected. Even things that seem far away. One thing that's in the slides that I was thinking about was, we look at a star that's over 2 billion light years away, right? We're looking at it. That means that at the exact moment that we're looking up at this thing, that specific ray traveled for 2 billion years to meet your eye as it's coming here. That's connection. Kala, kilo jale. Shotimura tilo. Kumbo, Aisheton.
So then talking about creation, simple as in theory, the pie. I was thinking, is it like you look to create? I was trying to as in connect to with things and as in painters painting.
I wanted to give it some more thought because I saw it come through, and I was thinking about the different manifestations of the eye. The eye of Ra, the eye of Heru, and tying it into those things, because like when you look at the one of the versions of the creation story from ancient Kemet, it talks about Atum. Connected. Actually, we even showed like a little animation of it, of the eye being connected to creation in that sense, going through out noon searching for Shu and Tefnut. So I'm going to give it some more thought. I just didn't want to run something to you, because it's not like I've been sitting around thinking about I create. But I think it's plausible. I think it's plausible because like when you look at even in the Akan language, you have the word, for example, in Treswa. And what you're saying is wushe weso na oye saadiano. So I'm looking at it as I'm making my creation. Right? And then I was looking at specifically like Akan, Yoruba, the word for create, being linked to the idea of strike. So Akan bo, bo idea. So the root is bo. So obo idea is coming from bo, me bo adi fufo, right? And then Yoruba, the word for create is da, which is again coming from the word da, right? To strike. So I want to look at it first in that specific Kemetic context, then also look at it in other contemporary African cultures and.
Go back to your primary.
Yeah, that's what everything is. It's not what did my teacher tell me, what did my supervisor want me to do. Later for all that, I'm going to the primary sources. What you read, I can read. You have your perspective. You're standing in front of the elephant. I'm standing behind the elephant. I got my perspective, which is valid. I'm seeing the same thing you're seeing, right? As opposed to I'm behind a wall and you're describing it to me.
It's a lot of work to be done.
Oh yeah. But that's why we're here.
Yeah, and that's why I don't know. Like, I mean, I get some kind of inspiration from my grandma when at least the quote I saw in the Bibitu Kasa about how, as in like it's the healing process of our patients. You don't have to. As it's something we should know that it could take a millennia. It's not going to manifest in our time, but otherwise, if we rush it, we not only destroy ourselves but our patients. So at least the patient is kind of, you know, sometimes you see things going wrong and you're like, just, you know, yes, I mean, it will take a long time to manifest. But
you remember the proverb? I think we shared in this class. Bien fan fier bien fan chien. Now we find that front.
okay, I'll tell you.
Fier bien fan chien. Now we find that crop.
One day to straighten himself.
Something I would use 3 days to.
And fear Adriasa.
30 years. So you want to take just a day to straighten himself. If you don't take it, you might even break.
So this is an ancient concept, right? Anyone with any logical skills would say this is what's going on. Now the tree, you can see people who can move the tree, and eventually the branches will go in a specific direction. Now I was thinking about this. We have these power lines in front of our compound at Hacho, and you can even see how trees may decide to go around these power lines, right, over time. So they're avoiding certain things that may mesh into a fence and become part of the fence. And, you know, you look at things like that and it makes you think about the decision-making processes going on in the tree. You're saying, oh, this is something that's electric. I want to avoid this. So let me grow my branches to avoid this thing. There's a wall here. Let me grow. These are decisions. There's a documentary, The Secret Life of Plants, that was done in the 70s that goes into some of these things.
That would be really nice to see.
Yeah, the soundtrack is done by Stevie Wonder. So a lot of people look at it just to get the soundtrack, like, oh, good, this is, you know, nice. But yeah.
I actually have my face where I'll talk to trees. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You stopped?
Yeah, I stopped.
Okay.
I was wondering. You don't listening. Well, actually now they charge to go in there, so I can't go in.
Of plants. Yeah. You can find it on different torrent sites, so you just download it as a torrent.
It will bring it back.
In a long time.
Yeah, but it's a good, even though we weren't able to do our class for today, and we're now 2 weeks behind somehow, we're actually right on time. We say that just as destiny is the guiding line of one's life, the syllabus is the guiding line of the course. There may be some accidents and incidents in between, but we'll get to where we need to get to.
Yes.
What's going on?